Minister, I'm sure you're really pleased with the US support on this issue. What does this support actually mean practically?
Good evening, Sally. It's a very, very significant development with the potential to be the game changer on the talks. To date, South Africa with India and about 100, just over 100 other WTO members have been asking for a waiver that would enable countries and firms to produce without having to get the consent of the patent holder. And the countries that were supporting this were all developing countries. The United States is the first developed country to have joined the call for a waiver. And immediately after the announcement was made, the Trade Minister of New Zealand tweeted his support for the waiver. So we're seeing a growing momentum now, and it augurs well. So from here, the next step would be to get further discussions with the European Union. They comprise a very large block of countries, and we're looking forward to the European Union joining the consensus. Once that happens, we have critical mass, because the basis of the WTO is to try to build as much consensus as possible. And on that consensus, the negotiators then begin to roll up their sleeves, sit down in a room and begin to negotiate text, the actual language of the waiver, what kind of products it would cover, for what period it would be covered, what are the exceptions, what are the conditions to the waiver. Those kind of things then get into the discussion.
All right.
Up to now, the talks have been about talks. But as soon as we get enough consensus, we can begin to formulate the very text that gives us the legal basis for the waiver.
I see. So there's a lot of political support now, even from developed countries, which is fantastic news. But as you say, you still have to get into a room with those pharmaceutical companies. Surely they can still just say no.
Ultimately, it's in the hands of governments, because the decision-making in the World Trade Organization are nation states. The protection of intellectual property it has a long history. But a number of years ago, the World Trade Organization adopted something called TRIPS, which is the Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, a clumsy acronym. But within TRIPS and the surrounding architecture, it permits governments to provide waivers and exceptions. So if we get the consensus of governments, we can begin to knock together the terms. And these are also agreed by governments. No doubt they will be consulting with pharmaceutical companies, but ultimately it is in the hands of the public sector. And Sally, I'd like to also draw attention to the fact that billions and billions of dollars have been put into vaccine developed by the public sector. And the client, the customer, is by and large the public sector. So it's governments across the world that are both stumping up the money for research and development in many cases, and also purchasing the product. So it does give us, I think, hope that we can make a breakthrough and save lives with this important and significant development.
All right, so it means quite a lot more leverage. Talk to us about the ultimate result and what it might be. Would it mean that the price of these vaccines come down, or would it mean that the vaccines are much more widely manufactured so that we get more out quickly?
The first and most important thing for us would be to have vaccines much more widely produced, not just in some parts of the world, but across the world, using factories that are either producing other things and are now being repurposed for this, and so that we can administer these vaccines rapidly so that lives are saved. When we started the talks in October last year, 1 million people had died as a result of COVID-19. Today, literally at the moment when we have the first developed country joining us in a consensus, we've already lost more than 3 million people. And we've got to get vaccines out, because the top 10 countries that have administered vaccines accounts for 76% of all vaccines that have been administered to date. And Africa, our continent, with more than 1 billion people, accounts for only 1.6% of the vaccines that have been administered. So the most important thing is to get the supplies ramped up, get them more accessible to everybody, and then, of course, as a result of significant additional supply, we can expect the price to fall. At the moment, what keeps the prices high is it's really a seller's market. People are desperate to get these vaccines, rightly and understandably so, and so there's a bidding war that raises the price. So we can get both more access and better prices as a result of this if we can complete the remaining steps.
Right, so it's moving in the right direction. I'm just wondering how long it might still take, because sure, the virus is going to be with us for some time, sadly, but we're all desperate, particularly here in South Africa, for our vaccine program to get fully underway. So how quickly are these next steps likely to happen?
Sally, I think we need to brace ourselves for many months of negotiation. There are two big hurdles to cross. The first one is to get consensus from additional developed countries, and this step by the United States is a big step forward. And then secondly, to get the text knuckled down and agreed. So I think we're looking at a number of months of negotiation. And it may be that the World Trade Organization would have to call a special meeting of trade ministers to formally take the decision. But all else failing, there is a scheduled meeting of the World Trade Organization in November. I hope we can get progress much faster than that, because the virus is also mutating. We're having new strains, so we've got to prepare ourselves for the fact that this is not going to be resolved. The virus is not, COVID won't disappear by the end of this year. It's still going to be around. Hopefully we will have much better protection for human beings, and hopefully with more capacity, better research and development, we can also respond more rapidly to new strains in the virus. So I would say it's not something that will be resolved in weeks, but it would be a number of months of negotiation.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It is a positive step forward nonetheless. We do appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much. That was Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Ibrahim Patel.